Hi and welcome to this week's video. This week we are going to extend our API which we programmed 2 weeks ago. So stay tuned and watch the video.
Alright, so let's start with the post request. Last time we created our array with some objects which contain fruit, vegetables and grain. And in here we also got a get request to just return an hello world statement. We generated a food API to return our array with all the objects in it. And we also created a get request to return our type with a parameter. So now let's start to create a post request. And doing this is as simple as the get request. We just type app.post, and in here we type in the path we want to post to. We take the quotes and write API food, and then we also add our known request and respond function. Yep. So now what we need to do is since we don't connect currently to a database, we are having to do this manually. But anyway, we need a new constant. The type of what do we want to store, and we want to store an object. The next thing, our objects, as you know from the food, we require always a type and a name. So we need a type, and we also need a name for that object. And now we need to think, where does the type and name come from? So in this case, it's coming from the request, because the user wants to post a new type of food or into the array. So it's coming from the request, and in there's a body, and this should have a type. So we do the same thing for the name, and I'm missing a comma here. Okay, then the next thing is we need to, now we have our object, but this still needs to go into our array above here. So we go to foods and push the new food to it. And then after that, because often, not in our case currently, but if you have an object which the server would return something, for example, you have an object which contains an ID, the server would generate the ID for that object, and often the client wants to operate with the ID of that new object. So it's always good to also send the just freshly created object back to the user. Okay, so now we save that and we could test that. To test it, I recommend you to install Postman, and I'm quickly showing you how to do this. Within Chrome, you can type in just simply Chrome Postman, and then you get to the chrome.google.com, and in here you just can simply click add, or as it's in German, hinzufügen, and add the app, and then you got it within your apps in Chrome. You click it, the app opens, and here it asks you to sign up. You can do this, it's free, but you can also just click that link here. But before we can send the request, we have to do one more thing, and that's Express can't handle JSONs out of the box, JSON files requests out of the box. So we need to add app app.use, we need to add a middleware. And that's express.json. Yeah, what it does is express.json returns this type of middleware. And with the .use, app.use, we are using this middleware in the request processing pipeline. So now this should work. We don't have to do anything else down here. We just can use it now. Yeah, so let's start up the server and see if our post request works. All right, so after you have Postman installed, so you can click on post here. You type in the localhost api.food, and then you go to the body, click on raw, and in here you choose JSON. Then we are typing our JSON, so we need to have a type, and the type is fruit. And then we also need to have a name. And the name is, let's say, banana. All right, then make sure that your application is running, and then you can send the post request. And what you get now here is the returning object, which is our just created object. Okay, so now let's validate the input, what the user gives to us. Because currently, if I'm, for example, erasing here the name, currently we're trusting what the user is sending to us, and this returns that the object is still generated, and that's not good. Because now we would have an object in our foods which only has a type of fruit without a name. What we want to do is to check what the user is sending us through the API. So please always note, never trust what the client is sending to you. So what we can do is just simply check the request body and type in here, for example, the food. And if this is missing, we return a 400 error message, which is a bad request. So we are responding with the status 400, and we can send name is required. But since we also have not only the name, but also the type, we type in type. We basically do the same for, we just can copy it. We do the same for the type and return here, type is required. Currently, if you already know JavaScript, then it would return the 400 bad requests to the user, but it also would execute currently the code. To prevent this, we just add a return after the error message has been sent. And if we then go back to our API and send the request without the name, then we get name is required. And if we change this one to the name value, then we get type is required. This is a basic validation input, but there's actually a better way, because if you have a bigger API, you don't want to write all this stuff, especially if you consider we are only checking if the body name is here, but the body name, for example, should have a minimum of 3 characters. Then you would have to check this here as well. So this would be blown up very fast. But of course, there's a library to support us here, and you can simply go to Google, type npm joy, and then you get to this sweet little library which does input validation for us. As you can see, this is a library which is very popular. It has a weekly download rate of 2.1 million, so it's also trustworthy. And so we just go to npm e install joy. Then above here we need to import or require the new library, and for this we type in require joy. And of course we are saving this in a constant, but since the require statement in this case is returning, like the package is returning a class, we do a capital J here instead of a lowercase j. This is best practice to always capitalize classes in JavaScript, so we do that. Then in our post request, we have to create a so-called scheme for the input validation. So we're telling Joy how the object should look like and what are the constraints. So we would need to have a name, and then we are simply calling the Joy class, telling Joy this is a string, and let's say this has to be a minimum of 4 characters, and it's also required. And then we also have a type, and we just set this the same. Okay, after we have our scheme, we now can type in joy validate. And what should it validate? It should validate our request body and against our just created schema. And since this is returning now an object, we can store that into result. So now we have return of the object in our result constant, and let's just print that for now to the console. So if we call up, first we need to run our app again. So and if I now run our API again with the failing type, then I get an error here. And this is an object, as said. We're returning this to the console currently. And this says basically error, validation error, child type fails because type is required. And then we have some other stuff here. Currently this is nothing we should return to the user actually. So we go back to our if statement, and in here we are just checking if the result object has an error. And if this is a case, then we can return the 400 object, the 400 bad request. And in here we go to error. We can remove that, and we do the same for, we basically can now save our else if statement. Save that again. We should listen, and if we now send it, we get the error object. And this is still too complicated to send to a user. So what we actually want to return is the details. There's an array in there with all the error messages. And in this first object, we have a message which we actually want to return. So we go into the details object, we grab the first array entry and return the message. You can also loop over all the arrows and return them. So you can grab all the array entries here and return the message of each of the objects. And now we get type is required. If we enter the type again, but maybe just input 2 numbers as a string and adding a comma, then type must be a string. If we convert it to a string with 2 letters, then type must be at length 4 characters long. So this is, let's type in fruit. And now we're getting back our object. So we have a simple input validation already set up. Yeah, and that's how you can create a post request for your API with a simple schemata and input validation. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like it and also subscribe to my channel if you don't want to miss the next tutorial, which would be about the put requests and also update requests. So stay tuned and see you in the next one.